The next panel starts now.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum. We will be starting the next session. First of all, I want to thank Princess Ibtisam Al-Kitbi. You're my princess. On behalf of everybody, and also thanking the organizers and everybody who's behind making this a great success. And I am truly honored and privileged to be here with you and in the company of such a fine group of speakers. I have with me David Markowski from Washington Institute, Mr. Shibli Telhami is from University of Maryland. We have His Excellency Tahir Masri from Jordan, former Prime Minister and Speaker of lower and upper houses. And we have Robert Malley from the International Crisis Group, Chief Executive and President. You can read more about their bios in the leaflet as well as the program given to you. And the topic of the day is Deal of the Century. Deal of the Century tackles one of the most complex, one of the most important and protracted issues that is now in the Middle East and has been. President Trump, during his election campaign in 2016, talked about a deal. He promised to come up with something that would deal with the root causes of issues in the Middle East and would provide a plan to solve problems of the wider Middle East, but more specifically the Palestinian and Israeli conflict. And then when he was elected, he asked 3 people, close aides, to bake the idea. And there were a lot of speculation, but to date, not much known about the exact way it was baked. The details were not known, but leaked, and there was circumstantial evidence for what it might contain. And last June, Jared Kushner went to Bahrain and revealed the economic component of the deal. But the political component remained unknown. And the economic component, it turned out that it consists of raising something like $50 billion from affluent countries in the region, much of it in the form of loans, some of them grants, some investment, most of it spent in Palestine, some of it in Jordan, Egypt, and Lebanon. These are mainly to support infrastructure and business projects. Something like 179 were named, a couple of leaflets were published, and now we have more specific details about them. But the political side remains a mystery. There are, again, leaks, indirect evidence, talks about it, rejections, sometimes universal rejection, even though Mr. Kushner kept insisting that, as well as Mr. Friedman, who was one of the 3 who baked the idea, they keep saying that it's good for America, good for Israel, good for the world, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's good for Palestine. Today we're going to hear more about this and we'll learn more about this. And I'm going to ask David to have a go using the intelligence available to him and the great insight he's accumulated over the years to tell us what is it, what is the deal, and how was it formulated and how is it likely to be pursued. David.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank Ibtisam too. Could you hear me in the back? Okay. I want to thank Dr. Ibtisam for inviting me and to EPC for putting together this fantastic conference. It's an honor to be here, so thank you very much. Look, I want to say from the start, I served in the last administration, in the Obama administration. I've otherwise been in the think tank world, devoted my life to this issue. I think any solution needs to give dignity to both or it won't work. But I want to be fair to the Trump administration, even though I have my critiques. I want to say that, first of all, the term deal of the century, as far as I know, did not come from the United States. It does not come from President Trump. He once used the term ultimate deal, but the term deal of the century, I think we've traced it to a press conference with President Sisi of Egypt, who used the phrase, and it caught on in the Arab world, and Abu Mazen, President Abbas of Palestine, loved the idea, and he's the one who popularized the term deal of the century. But it's never been said ever by the United States, as far as I could tell, by President Trump or his aides. And also, to be humble, I want to be very careful. They have kept this secret very well, these three people. They do not share it even in the US government. And so what we say is what we could speculate based on their questions and the like, but not based on leaks. And so I want to be very cautious in this regard. As you pointed out, they organized, with the help of the Kingdom of Bahrain, an economic conference. They did not see the economics as a standalone. They felt it had to be part of a package, the final status package on the 5 core issues. They felt they would go above and beyond what had been offered in the 3 other major efforts by the United States on what we call final status, the core issues. President Clinton's efforts in the year 2000, and Rob Malley, I know, was part of that group. The second effort was Condoleezza Rice's efforts in 2007-8, the Annapolis team. I was an advisor in the Office of the Secretary of State, John Kerry, led by Martin Indyk. This was 2013-14. These were the 3 big efforts of the United States to solve this issue in total, taking into account the critique of the Palestinians that gradualism had run its course, and we had to think big and solve it all. The Trump administration's critique of the 3 efforts is, well, the 3 didn't work. We will do more for the Palestinians than the Democrats did. We will do plus on the economic side, but it is not a standalone because it has to be linked to an acceptance of the 5 core issues, the final status issues. That is the issue of borders, security arrangements, Jerusalem, refugees, and mutual recognition. Do you accept the character of the other side's state? And so therefore, the Trump administration has taken an approach which I personally and respectfully disagree with, which is it's all or nothing. If you say yes on the 5, you get 178 economic projects. My fear is in the Middle East, whenever it's all or nothing, it's nothing. And if we forget this lesson, we will learn it again and again at our peril. So that is the approach. So on economics, their view is we are going to do plus. We are going to go beyond, even though all the Democratic efforts always talked about a multi-billion-dollar economic idea, but they will flesh it out, and they fleshed it out in the Bahrain workshop in this summer. The 5 issues, as you point out, the final status, as we call them, has not been fleshed out. They are waiting clearly for a new government in Israel. They've told me, what's the point of putting out something now when there's no government? But what I would like to say to this audience, and I hope it's a distinction that is appreciated, my colleagues may disagree with me, my view is that this late in the cycle of the first administration, with the US election coming up in 2020, they will put out what's called, I would call a vision and not a plan. What's the difference between a vision and a plan? The vision is they will lay out their ideas. It's 50 to 60 pages. It's a long amount of text. But their view is Abbas has already rejected it, so it's not really a plan at this point. Maybe if we're reelected, Abbas will understand that this was coming back, and they will negotiate on it. But at minimum, it's a historic reference point. It's a benchmark, a milestone. You had the Clinton plan, you had the Kerry plan, and now you will have the Trump plan. But it's a vision, not that tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. in the Oval Office do I expect the new Prime Minister of Israel and Abbas to negotiate. So how do they, on the 5 issues, I will say they will...
David, can I...
Sure.
I'd like to come back to you once we go deeper into this, but just a quick observation.
Yeah.
We keep talking about administration.
Yeah.
Does that mean the State Department and the establishment are not involved? Is this a U.S. policy or is this administration policy? Because that has impact on continuity.
Sure. Yeah.
What do you think?
It's totally being driven out of the White House. You said it correctly. It's really 3 people. Jared Kushner, who sits in the West Wing of the White House.
Greenblatt.
Who is now resigning but is still kind of half in and half out. And David Friedman, who you mentioned on the ground now in Jerusalem. So these are the three. And I think on the borders and on East Jerusalem, they might pleasantly surprise the Arab side, because the Arab side at this point has such negative media vibe that to exceed expectations at this point is on the easier side, because they keep calling it the deal of the century as a negative term. So I think on the borders, they will not reach Kerry's numbers on the West Bank. I've done a lot of work on websites. I could talk for years about this on the land issue. We don't have the time. I think they will have a capital in East Jerusalem. But how much of East Jerusalem? Will it include the Old City? I think these are questions that are going to have to be asked, and I think there's reason to doubt it. And on security, I think they will lean a little more to Israel. The refugee issue, I think like all administrations, they will say we don't want one refugee to live in poverty, in squalor. We want them to live in dignity, but in Palestine and not in Israel. Will there be something symbolic maybe in Israel, but basically it's Palestine. But there will be probably more similarities than differences, but it will not maybe reach the Kerry standard from a Palestinian perspective, and this should be said. So maybe on economics, it's plus plus, but on the political, there will be differences that I think will create some discomfort, but probably better than some of the Palestinians think.
Thank you, David. That's really excellent start. And I would like to capture this two-state issue, how much this plan or vision or how much this administration actually believes in it, which I'm going to talk to Shivli about. But I want to leave you with a question which I don't want you to answer now, but formulate or organize your thought around it. Again, the cycle of politics and elections in the United States, we are already in it. We may have Biden, we may have Trump. Either way, things could change. So I'd like to know what may change, but also real politics is local politics. We now have in Israel, we have Bibi and Benny. So what happens if Bibi carries on, if what happens in Benny actually wins the election? So I'd like you to think about that, organize your thoughts, and I'll come back to you. I will not forget the question. But Shibli, I would love to hear from you. You're from America, you see it, but you have a great insight into what happens inside Palestine. You've also, as an academic, you've observed different administrations adopting different policies and invariably not successful, whether it's the diplomacy that didn't work or the policy didn't work. So I'd like you to give us a perspective of what is it that is not working and what could work in the best scenario.
Thank you. Let me also add my thanks to Dr. Ibtissam for inviting me and for this excellent conference. Let me zoom out a little bit so we don't get lost in the trees. We really need to look at the forest a little bit here. And in a way, try to identify what is really unique about the way the Trump administration is handling the Middle East compared to prior administration. Of course, the problem didn't start with them. As David said before, previous administrations have failed. And frankly, despite the best of intention, Obama has failed. But what is unique here, if you look at it in perspective, is that in regard to the American failure, it isn't just that presidents failed. The reality of it is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has become less strategically important to America after the end of the Cold War. In fact, the major success really was Jimmy Carter during the Cold War. And since the end of the Cold War, this has not been enough of a priority issue to any American president to do what needs to be done to put it through the American political system, because it became more of a domestic issue than a foreign policy issue. To varying degrees, sometimes the issue forced itself, but never has an American president since the end of the Cold War made it a top priority. Let me give you an example with Obama. So Obama really wanted to do something on it. He came in saying, I want to deal with this issue. He appoints George Mitchell. But Obama never made it a political priority for him, despite all of what he did. In contrast, for example, to the Iran nuclear deal, where he said, this is an important strategic issue for me, I'm going to make it a priority, and he put it through, whether you like the agreement or not. He managed to put it through, despite the fact that he had opposition in Congress and had an Israeli prime minister saying this is an existential threat. And so he managed to put it through. So it hasn't been a priority issue, and frankly, during the Obama administration, several of us advised the Obama administration on this issue, on this panel. So it's not that we're criticizing Obama per se, but frankly, it made it even harder for those who want to push for a two-state solution to happen. So by the time Trump comes in, we already have a sense that maybe two states is not workable. At least some people are making that argument more likely. But so what did Trump do that is really different? And here I would say he did a lot that is different from the others. Let me give you four differences that are extremely important. Every administration up until Trump, when they wanted to mobilize the Arab world, including here the Gulf region, since really the Crown Prince Abdullah of Saudi Arabia put on the Arab peace plan, there was a sense that bringing the Arabs in is intended to help Israel make more compromises to the Palestinians. That is, you offer them normalization, economic trade, in exchange for Israeli concessions. The Trump people believe it's exactly the opposite. You bring in the Arab states to put pressure on the Palestinians, to get more concessions from the Palestinians, to accept the reality on the ground, because they think the strategic picture has shifted, both because of the rise of Iran, because of distraction from Israel-Palestine. So there's an extremely important difference in the approach. Second, I think it's the first administration. Every administration since the existence of Israel has been leaning toward Israel. This hasn't changed to varying degrees. It's not that this is the first administration that leans toward Israel, because every administration has in practice to varying degrees again. But this administration is the first administration to proactively work to implement an agenda that is friendly to the Israeli right. The first one, including on moving the embassy to Jerusalem. There was no political pressure on the administration to the embassy to Jerusalem. There wasn't even pressure from the Israelis. And they implemented that on their own, for their own agenda, including also their shifting of position on settlements. That's extremely important. Third, it's the first administration which takes out reference to international resolutions, the United Nations, prior agreements. Every negotiation, even ones that have been very favorable to Israel, have been at least starting with some frame of reference that gives the Palestinians some leverage with reference to United Nations resolution, international agreements, and prior Israeli-Palestinian agreements. This administration came and said, no, we don't want, there's a reality on the ground. In essence, a vision that Israel has won the historical conflict. The Palestinians have to accept a lot less. It's what they refer to as realities, without reference to the fact that these realities are asymmetrical in large part because the United States has helped Israel become more powerful over the years and thus has a responsibility. But that is a huge difference from that. And finally, one point that I think is important, and it was brought up earlier. Religion is an important subject. And I respect the role of religion in the conflict. It's important to Jews, it's important to Muslims, it's important to Christians, and we got to respect that. Everybody has to respect that. But it is wrong to make religion the basis for political decisions and political sovereignty in the 21st century. Okay. And I think what we have seen here is American diplomacy and players in American diplomacy, including the vice president, the ambassador to Israel, who have referenced religion as the basis for settlements in the West Bank, for the embassy in Jerusalem, in a way that is not only detrimental for now, but in a way that define the conflict in religious terms and plant seeds for future conflict down the road.
Thank you. That's excellent. Really nice overview. And I know you're American, but you were born in Palestine, and you're Betlahmi, Telhami as in Bethlehem. You may be the best person that I should ask you one direct question, because I always like self-criticism as well, and I needed a Palestinian to do that. Thinking about Mr. Abbas, can he really strike a deal? Can he compromise on many issues, including refugees? I think the 5 issues you mentioned, David, 4 of them are mathematical, all negotiation, but refugees is a contentious issue. And does he have the legitimacy? Can he actually negotiate on behalf of all Palestinians? I'd like you to answer that after I come back, after I go back to the rest, but think about it, organize your thoughts. But now I'm going to move to His Excellency, Mr. Masri. Now, you're Masri by title, by surname, as an Egyptian. You're Nabulsi by birth, that's Palestinian, and you're Jordanian by citizenship. Who's better than that to actually tell us the implications of any policy of this kind on all of these countries, on Jordan to start with, but actually Egypt, and we are now in Emirates, in Abu Dhabi, on here too. So I'd like you to tell us about the implication, because it does involve all these countries, one way or the other, whether it's to do with finance, recipient or not, or donor, but importantly about issues and problems. And congratulations, by the way, to Jordan. You've managed to reacquire a couple of places, towns yesterday, and again in that context, it matters more at home to you. Please.
Thank you very much. I listened to what has been said, and I tell you, I don't care who called it the deal of the century. It is now called the deal of the century, and it fits and fits the thinking of Mr. Trump, because it's a deal. It has a commercial connotation, so it really it fits him very well. Now, I heard a lot of talk about the principles or the material in this initiative. I tell you that we don't know what's in this initiative. We don't know. We are just guessing. But we know one thing, that the American administration has acknowledged, accepted the fact that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. Greater Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. And the Knesset has adopted the national law, which became part of the Constitution. That's the deal of the century. It's already done. It's already considered or abolished the Palestinian people. It's abolished Palestine. It says now the part of the Constitution of Israel says that this is the land of the Israeli nation, and only Jews can live and can be citizens in this land. This is the deal, and I don't know how can we ignore this important development. If we look at the Zionist movement when it started 100 years ago in Basel, there were stops, there were stations, there were important decisions taken. The Balfour Declaration is part of it. The Sykes-Picot is part of it. The wars are part of it. And now it is this law that makes Israel the sole owner of Palestine, and no consideration for any people. They will be residents, but not citizens. And that is the worst thing, the most racist thing that could happen. And we are watching, and we are talking about a few billions here and there, taking from Arab countries and paid to the Palestinians to say, shut up, eat this is your nation, your land, your country for bread. That will not happen. It will not happen. And I assure you that all what you have said, give me a promise, tell me that when you talk about all these matters, that this is an occupied territories. Just tell me that, and I'll be very satisfied with the future of solving the Palestinian. Until today, Netanyahu annexed the Golan Heights, annexed Jerusalem, is annexing a compound of settlements every day. And the West Bank is becoming, or the Palestinian territory is not coming Palestinian. It is, they are losing it, and there will not be a room or a space for the Palestinians to establish a homeland. This will mean that those people will be ousted. They will go out. Something will happen to them, and this is not their land anymore. Why the presidents, you mentioned Shibli, that the presidents didn't make it. Of course they didn't make it, because they were not able to get a declaration that this is an occupied territories. We had 242. We were the Western world. I don't want to name names, but some Western countries were dragging us, the Palestinians and the Arabs, to day after day until Israel is well established now in the occupied territories, in Yehuda and Samira, as they call it, and they are entering, and they have plans for our mosque, our Aqsa mosque. So I think, talking about religion, we are not involving religion at all. It is the basic law of Israel. The Constitution of Israel says this is the Jewish religion, of Jewish religion, of Judaism.
Can I, Your Excellency, forgive me for interrupting. Can I specifically ask you what would make you happy as a Jordanian or a politician in Jordan, to look at the implication of the economical component and the political one? What is it that you really think would be satisfactory?
I think we should go back to the basics. There has to be a viable Palestinian state with Jerusalem as its capital. And the Palestinians are not demanding like before. They are not demanding all of Palestine or anything against the Jewish or the Israeli state. So we want to live they want to live, and we want to live in peace together. Yes, we need to invest in the West Bank much more, and that will make it less conservative or less متطرف, how do you say?
Extremists.
Extremists. So, and the Palestinians will be happy to do that, and they are ready to do that. All the previous stuff has been abolished, has changed, and Palestinians want a homeland in the West Bank and Gaza, and that's the position of all Arab nations, Arab countries, and the Palestinians.
Would that be similar from Egypt, Egyptian point of view? If they were to express their own satisfaction or own point of view, and looking at the diplomacy here, would they share the same views as you?
Sure, maybe not, I don't know, but I tell you, what made Anwar Sadat not not succeeding in the continuation of Camp David for not what he achieved, for what he did not achieve, the Palestinian issue. This is the heart of the problem. No Arab, no Middle East, no region will be settled unless there will be a fair solution for the Palestinians. It will not die down. It will not die down. Israel was established in 1948. Look what it is now today. Yeah, it is powerful and it is, but when it comes to feeling security, they are pushing their security borders further to keep saying that this is better for our security. It might end at Bab el-Mandab that it is their border is there. So my point is, without the Palestinian issue solved, believe me, there will not be a comprehensive peace. And
that's very clear cut, and I thank you very much for that. But can I leave you with a question, just like the rest, to think about? If you were to put yourself in the place of either Mr. Trump or his team, who will inevitably need to come and sell the idea, convince people, engage the stakeholders on the ground, each country by country, as well as the Palestinians. You're a man of practice, and you have been a policymaker and a decision maker. You would know what works, how Trump should be engaging every stakeholder in the region. So I'd like you to think about what would be your advice to say how you should make it work if it was actually a great idea to sell. But I'll come back to you. You think about it, and I will move to Robert now. And Robert, maybe there are two things that I want, but to begin with, you're looking at it as a bird's eye view from outside. And if you were to think about the current administration's priorities, surely Palestinian issue, Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which has been chronic, protracted, ongoing, and there are so many urgent issues and crises, say the least about sort of Iran and Syria and Iraq and so on. So in your opinion, what would be their thinking now? Is this actually a top priority? Is this something that they will come back to as a matter of urgency, or do you think there are other things? Because I'm really interested also to see whether this whole game is directed towards Iran or not, because solving the Middle East problem, rallying Arab support, is this a way of creating this kind of approach to reduce Iran? Please.
Thank you. And first I want to thank Ibtisam both for inviting me and for the partnership between our two organizations. The answer to your question, do I think that it's a priority for this administration? In some ways, I'd say it doesn't really matter. And I know we're late for lunch, so I could almost shorten this whole panel by saying the whole deal is utterly irrelevant. I will have something to say nonetheless. Nobody really is going to pay attention to what the administration does on paper on this issue. The only people going to pay who are devoted to it are the people who wrote it, who spent many hours, and who probably are going to regret having done so. And all of those, including many people in this room and on this panel, who are going to spend hours reading it, the 60 pages that David mentioned. But to the people on the ground, to the Israelis and Palestinians, I think it has no significance whatsoever. I think what's important, and the reasons why the Trump administration put this on the table, I think it's partly because every administration is attracted to this issue for one reason or for another. Every administration that I've worked in, plus the others. And I think in this case, Shibli put it very well, but there's also obviously the Iran factor, which has been their big theory of the case, which is the trade-off for the Arabs is they normalize or they take steps towards Israel, and there'll be this common front against Iran. But on the Israeli-Palestinian issue, I think we have to distinguish what matters and what doesn't matter. What doesn't matter is this plan, and I really mean it. I'm sure I'll read it, but I think, as Mr. Masri just said, a lot of what the administration is doing on Israel-Palestine, they've done it already. You don't need to wait for the plan, and the plan will just be words on paper that nobody's going to take seriously the day after. So that is not something we should pay attention to. When it comes to Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I also question how much the next Israeli government, whatever it will be, matters all that much. It does make a difference, if you're an Israeli, in terms of the future of democracy, the future of judicial institutions. But in terms of whether we're going to see peace between Israelis and Palestinians, whether it's Prime Minister Netanyahu, Prime Minister Gantz, let's just reflect on the fact that both, as David said, President Clinton, President Obama, President Bush, all three in different ways put plans on the table. The plan that any Israeli government, future government will accept will be, I think it's almost guaranteed, less than what the Americans put on the table on all those three occasions. And on all those three occasions, for reasons that we could debate, the Palestinians said no. So can somebody imagine the next Israeli government, given where we are today, putting something on the table that offers the Palestinians more than what they rejected in the past? So I also think the character of the next Israeli government is not the determining factor. There are two determining factors. So those things don't matter. What does matter? Number one is what's happening on the ground. And there are many people in this room and on this panel who know about it in great detail. But what's happening on the ground says much more about whether there'll be a resolution to the conflict than what's in the Trump plan or what the next Israeli government will be. And what also matters, and about which people don't speak enough about, at least in the United States, is what's happening on the Palestinian political scene. I can't think of a Palestinian I've met who's, I'm going to just say, under the age of 40, maybe it's even older than that, who has any faith anymore in a two-state solution, in the Palestinian Authority, in the United States, in diplomacy. So they're the generation which is going to make all the decisions for the Palestinians coming into the future. And to think that they're going to be interested in what some of us have been working on now for many, many years or decades is, I think, to fall into a trap. That's not what they're going to be interested in. I think it's a big question. What their struggle is going to be. What are the Palestinians going to be motivated by? Where they're going to direct their energies? What kind of political leadership will come once Abu Mazen is no longer president? And what will be the future of negotiations if the Palestinians no longer are interested in even the subject of the conversation, because they don't think that it will respond to their needs and they don't think that it is doable anymore. So if the two-state solution is no longer realistic, both because of what's happening on the ground and because there's a loss of interest, frankly, on both sides, and if there is no alternative that anyone can truly imagine, and I think, I've not yet read an alternative. There may be some that people have to think about, but I've not seen one that meets the core interests of the Israelis and Palestinians. Then I think we have to face the fact that the most sustainable reality has been the one that people have always said is unsustainable, which is the status quo. And that is very worrisome, but it is probably at this point the most likely future is what we've lived up to so far. And at some point, that will break, because it's hard to see the Palestinians accepting that status quo forever. But if the two-state solution is not realistic and any alternative is not a solution, it's very hard to see.
But Robert, I want to bring you back to what I wanted you to also comment. I mean, if you look at the Israeli-Palestinian issue surrounded physically by Hezbollah in Lebanon, Syrian government or regime on one hand, and then we've got this is like referring or inferring to Iranian influence in the region, and we've got even Gaza Strip and so on. So basically, these days, it's unlike 50 years ago, like 20 years ago, you cannot really tackle the issue without taking Iran into account. And I wanted you to comment on that, but also to be realistic, to see whether you need to deal with those issues first, or you can actually deal with the Palestinian issue, Israeli-Palestinian, irrespective of those.
I think we could exaggerate the role that Iran plays on this issue. I mean, obviously it plays a role in the sense that it will be highly critical of anything that comes out that doesn't meet what it considers to be basic principles, and it will have the support of much of Arab public opinion if there was a deal that crossed certain red lines. It does also have some impact on the ground. But it's a fact, for better or for worse, that both in the U.S. and at the level of decision makers, leaders across the region, the Israeli-Palestinian issue has taken second, third, or fourth place. When I traveled, David mentioned it, but when I traveled with Secretary Kerry during the years of the Obama administration, he was the person who brought up this issue, not his Arab interlocutors, with very, very few exceptions. So there's no doubt that in the minds of people here, that's not the issue. It will become the issue if things explode, and that's the worst reason for people to pay attention, but it's the only reason I think people are really going to pay attention to this issue, is if in fact, and I'm not hoping for it, but if in fact you see an explosion, that everyone will be focused on it again.
Thank you. I will leave you with a question like the rest, and that is really, sometimes somebody speaks for the devil. If you were to put yourself in the place of the Israelis, how would you tackle this? It's purely academic. I'm not saying that you're in any way closely associated with those visions or whatever they may have of policies. But I come back to you, David. I asked you a question. You remember the questions? Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And look, I think what you heard, what Rob said about the Palestinians saying no 3 times. On the 3rd time is a day I'll remember, and one day there'll be history books, so you'll remember this date because it's not known in the Arab world or anywhere, March 17th, 2014. I think that is a turning point in the history of this conflict. President Obama and Secretary Kerry worked very hard on this issue, and I would respectfully disagree with Shibli that we did not make it a priority. It was a top priority. We named George Mitchell in the Obama administration on the 2nd day of the administration. And Martin Indyk and the team sweat blood on every word of this framework. And President Obama just said, I want an answer. You know, you owe me an answer if we've worked for many months on this. And President Abbas said on March 17th in the Oval Office, I will give you an answer within a week. And I could safely say he never gave an answer. He said, I'll consult with my colleagues. I asked his colleagues. He didn't consult with them. And I think we have to say something which will be a little uncomfortable. Both sides have made mistakes. The Israelis have made their mistakes, that's for sure. I don't think all mistakes are equal here, in that I really think we have to ask a question we might not want to hear, which is, maybe President Abbas cannot end the conflict. And on the issue of the refugees, yes, every refugee could go to Palestine, but he didn't want it maybe written in the history books that not the refugees could go to Israel. I don't know, but not to give an answer to President Obama, who no one can accuse him of being pro-Israel. He was very fair and balanced, and not even to give us an answer. My conclusion, frankly, is that President Abbas does not feel he could end this conflict.
Well, I'm glad
And I think that's the elephant in the room that we don't really discuss. And that's why I don't think President Trump's approach is right either, which is I don't think the Venn diagram on these 5 final status issues overlap. Okay. And I don't think the final status approach is right. I don't want to see things explode on the ground, as I'm worried like Rob is. But I think the way is to look at tangible steps. We've tried 3 times to hit the home run, to win the marathon. Maybe we need to do the 5K.
Okay. But David,
because I don't think this is a solution here. That's we would all want it. Okay. I think there's some hope now with Gantz, and I'm happy to discuss that. No. I think if we look forward, we have a chance. Look, the Likud has been in power 32 of 42 years. And like I said, I don't think Netanyahu can end this conflict either. I want to be clear. But I think the Arab world assumes he can't end it. But I think with Gantz, we have someone out of the Rabin tradition. What do I mean by the Rabin tradition? I mean someone who believes that settler ideology and security do not go together. I don't think that means he could solve everything tomorrow morning, especially if President Abbas is his partner at this point. But I do think he believes the current trajectory, as Rob said correctly, is not a good one. And you have to change it. You have to leave the door open for 2 states. You don't settle outside the security barrier. I think there are things he would want to do, but I would argue that you in this audience could have more of an impact on developments on the ground than you think. I know you think it's hopeless over there. I know you have other priorities with Iran and Yemen, and you've got like 50 issues. I get that. But I would say you could have an impact on creating political space, both for Gantz and for Abbas, if not to solve it, at least to give him room to take tangible steps on the ground. Because you could say something very simple that would make a huge difference. Every step that Israel takes towards the Palestinians, we Arab states will take towards Israel. And you will create political space in both societies, more economic assistance to the Palestinians, and will give Gantz some room. Yes, it'll depend what coalition he could configure, but he is someone who thinks the current trajectory is also bad for Israel. There's not been, with respect to Mr. Masri, Israel has not annexed new things in the West Bank every day. Yeah, Bibi on the eve of an election said, yeah, I could annex the Jordan Valley. I could annex anything. He could say whatever he wants. 13 years he was prime minister. He didn't annex an inch. And he made a ton of mistakes, don't get me wrong. So all I'm saying is that create space. You and the Arab states are powerful people in the Gulf in particular, but not just the Gulf, to give these sides some hope. They might not solve everything, but they can move in the direction even if they don't reach the destination tomorrow morning. It's in your power to make a difference on this issue, because if you do this parallelism, don't just say, Israel, if you solve everything, we will do the Arab Peace Initiative at the end of the rainbow. No, say parallel steps. A step by Israel will be a step by the Arab states. You could have a huge impact if you want to, but you have to want to. It has to be part of your priorities.
Okay.
That's all.
Well, David, you're wonderful. So I initially wanted to remind you of the questions in case you were straying from that, but then you hit the nail and decided not to interrupt you. So you were very practical, giving very objective advice. But given that he touched on the question that I put to you, Shibli, I'd like you to then address some of the questions that I put to David. And that is really, Abbas was one, but also what if Trump didn't win? What if he wins? So I'd like to look at these scenarios, future predictions.
Can I just
get, no, I get the Shibli, and then I will give you a chance when there's
30
time.
seconds.
Yeah.
I want to address the question of Palestinian leadership, but let me just say one more thing about the priorities. No, Obama did not make this a top priority issue. Convening somebody and instructing people to, and delegating a special envoy is not a priority. Priority is when you make it a strategic aim, where you go to Congress and you start to bat and you take some political risks and you do all the stuff that needs to be done, like he did with the Iran nuclear deal. That certainly never happened. I'd actually be very curious to hear what Rob Malley has as somebody who had the ear of the president on this one, to see what he thinks of that. But on the Palestinian leadership, look, the Palestinian leadership, of course, has been in many ways ineffective. The divisions among Palestinians have been hurtful to the Palestinians, both in terms of signaling where, even to supporters where to go, and have not been imaginative. But despite that, I think to think that had they been a little more imaginative or a little bit more forceful, Abu Mazen had been a little more clever, they will sway the unbelievably asymmetrical reality on the ground, facing an Israeli government that clearly isn't going to make a deal with them, and a U.S. that is not likely to weigh in any effective way, I think is to not understand the nature of negotiations. The Palestinians have, even with, I think, miraculous diplomacy, if they were to come up with it, and I don't think it's likely, that it would have been very hard to see how you can transform the asymmetrical realities on the ground with the aims of a right-wing government that has been governing for quite a while in Israel, with the aims of not giving up big chunks of the West Bank or East Jerusalem, and with an authority that is dependent on Israel even for survival, in some cases literally, and on the international community, and has very little lever, with an Arab world that is distracted by its own problems and threats to weigh in a concealed form. So yes, you could blame the leadership for being ineffective.
Okay.
You could ask for more, but to think that is going to transform the reality, I think, is to ask too much.
Thank you. Tahir, I asked you if you were to engage everybody and rally support and make a big difference in practical terms, what would you advise America?
First, I want everybody in this room to know and remember that I was the Prime Minister who led the government to Madrid conference. So I believe in what we are doing, and I believe what? Gun? You hear me?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. Then the earphone is. I believe in reaching peace, but it is again the Palestinians who should determine on that. I am surprised. How can we call Netanyahu go and do what he likes, and we insist that they start with the de facto situation, the facts on the ground? They don't go together. The Israelis assassinated their Prime Minister Rabin because he wanted to go in that direction. So we are ignoring a lot of facts about the issue of Palestine and the Palestinian vis-a-vis the occupation. I think we have to go back to مرة أخرى. Another time I say to the basics. There is 242. There is international law. There is some development within the Palestinian leadership. It accumulated, but it was Netanyahu's policies that stopped all that. And I think if you go now to the leadership of the PLO, Arafat, Abu Mazen, he will be ready, but on not to say you have to accept the de facto, because the de facto is there is no Palestinian state. The law that I mentioned to you, and it's part of the constitution now. It is active. It is legal now. Will not allow the Palestinians to build a state. If you ask me what will happen to the West Bank, I tell you, because we have to look at the developments since the Basel until today. This is a major step and station for Israel to have such a law. This means that, as we explained, that Palestinians will not have neither a two-state solution, a one-state solution, confederation with Jordan, autonomy, nothing, because they are not citizens. This is what the law says. They are not citizens. They don't belong to this land. So I will tell him all this to David. You are nervous, but
no, I have something to say, but I want to respectfully.
We are ignoring, just putting all the blame on the Palestinians and the Arabs. That's not fair anymore. Look where we are. Look where we are in Palestine. Okay. Anyway, I don't want to get...
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I think your advice was that be sensitive to the complexity. Robert, the question was about putting yourself in the place of Israeli for a minute, but also touch on any issue that you want, because you heard a lot of different...
but your question was put myself in Israel's shoes?
Yeah, but yeah. What would work? Because at the end, Israel, does it want peace? Or if it does, what should it do?
So first, I'll address the question about how much I think it was a priority for the Obama administration, and I'll be somewhere in between David and Shibli. Was it a priority in the sense that it's something the president really would have liked to have done and that he felt strongly about? Yes. Did he muster the kind of political muscle that Shibli speaks about in the case of Iran, assembling a broad interagency team, making sure that Congress was involved and the region? No, but I think there's two differences, or there's two points to make. Number one, these are different kinds of negotiations. One of them, it's the United States negotiating with Iran, where the United States has agency and it could decide exactly how far it's prepared to do, exactly. And then just needs to obviously make sure that Iran reaches a point of agreement. It's very different when you're a third party negotiating between the two, and there the dynamic I think that occurred. I wasn't there at the beginning. If Phil Gordon's in the room, he was there, and obviously David was there. But my sense of President Obama is that this was a story of an arc of disenchantment. He grew increasingly disenchanted with both parties, with Netanyahu very quickly, and with Abu Mazen gradually. But as David said, I think the turning point was March 2014, when he doesn't get a response from President Abbas. He decides, I've had enough of this. If Secretary Kerry wants to take care of it, that's fine, but I'm not going to expend my political capital when the parties who are going to have to make peace don't seem prepared to make it. So I think that's how I would summarize that. Now, on your question about Israel, I really don't have a good answer. I mean, it goes to the point I was making earlier. Obviously, if you had an Israeli government that had a completely different outlook, you could think of things that they could do to reach a settlement with the Palestinians. But in the real world, one of the things, and I think this was part of President Obama's calculation, or at least his assessment. He didn't act upon that assessment, but what are the incentives for Israel to move? The status quo they're doing pretty well. Economically, they're doing pretty well. Their relationship with the Arab world, I mean, I think you have to give some credit to Prime Minister Netanyahu. He has better relations with the Arab world today with a government that is less inclined to make peace with the Palestinians than his predecessors who were more inclined did. So he feels safer. Where are the threats coming from? You could say Iran. I think that's manageable. So why would they take the risk, the political risk, and whatever security risks is entailed by the creation of a Palestinian state, when there's no cost, there's no price to be paid for the status quo, and they still benefit from the U.S. support that they have? If that equation doesn't change, I could recommend things to the Israelis, but why would they listen to me? So I think, as I said, the most likely outcome is a perpetuation of the status quo with changes on the margins, but which won't affect the basic trajectory of the conflict.
Okay, thank you very much. You're urging to say something. 30 seconds, please.
No, I think look, I agree with Rob's sense of Obama, that I think March 2014 was a turning point. I just think that people are missing here that the Gantz moment, and I'm worried it's going to the window will shut. And that is, you have someone who, like Rabin, comes out of a pragmatic tradition, who believes it's not about settlements, ideology, it's about security. And this is a moment. Right now, Israel's relations are with Arab leaders under the table because of a convergence on Iran and a convergence on high tech and other economic issues. Now there's a chance to basically do things above the table. I'm not saying that the Arab states should do it for free with Israel. I know I'll get a question from Amr Moussa or someone about that. No, they should do it as a step for the Palestinians. And I think there is a real chance now that we have not seen before. And it doesn't do anybody any favors, not here, not in Israel, not in Palestinians, to just talk about people as victims. Okay. But self-responsibility and self-criticism, I think that's crucial if we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. So I am not so pessimistic. I don't think the status quo is a given, because I think these leaders do not want to see this thing go in the direction of a binational state. And therefore, I think there's hope. But I think we're all in this together, is what I'm trying to get at.
Thank you so much. You mentioned Amr Moussa. Your turn. I'm going to take a few questions before we have a final round. Thank you. Should work. Should work. It's working now.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, David, yes, indeed, I have a question to you, and comment on what have been said by the other three panelists. You mentioned something like the deal of the century is not necessarily a plan, but a vision. I want to warn all those researchers and members of think tanks, don't get preoccupied with this sentence. Don't waste your time on it. A plan, a vision, a paper, a proposal, whatever it is, we have to see what the contents are. A vision, so don't try to push new ideas and new issues for our think tanks to get busy with. Don't worry about that. Don't give it any importance. The vision, the plan, the contents are the important thing. That's number one. David, there is number two.
But there should be only number two. That's it.
No. I have 4 points.
No, please.
But I'll try to be very, very brief. Just
time, please.
Look, David, you mentioned something about give Gantz a space. Then you said you better propose a step for a step. Then you said something about Palestinian concessions. The time has come for the Arabs to press the Palestinians to make concessions. What is your point?
I didn't say that.
So it is perhaps another. What is your point here?
I did not say that.
What is your point?
Let him
A
speak.
step, if you are talking about a step for step, space for space, then you are on the right track. But to ask Arabs
I didn't say that.
to just press the Palestinians to make concessions, what kind of more concessions can they make? And the issue of under the table and over the table. Netanyahu went to, visited an Arab country. Other delegations visited several Arab countries. So what, not a single concession on the Israeli side?
Okay.
You want more of that?
Number 3.
More of that?
Number
no, yes, okay, I will skip one, but there is one point
Skip
that
one and
is
one.
worth discussing. This issue of religious and politics. The defining the conflict in religious terms, that is the continuation and affirmation of the theory of Huntington about the clash of civilizations with a special reference to Islam. So what Friedman has said and others have said about that they are eyeing the Islam and Muslim shrines. That's exactly it. Okay. So I believe that this issue of redefining the conflict in religious terms is going to ruin the whole thing.
Thank you.
I agree with
Okay, these are the officials around the White House that are promoting this idea.
Thank you very much.
This policy.
Thank you, Excellency. Now I'm going to...
I have 3 words to say. Remember the Arab Initiative,
Okay, 3 words.
which defines the Arab position of accepting normalization, accepting recognition in exchange of withdrawal and also recognition of the Palestinian rights. So that would be an implementation of what you say, David, if you can accept that. Arab Initiative contains all the concessions that are needed. This is our position on the Arab side.
I have to end it here. Sami Nasf. Sami Nasf, please.
Speak in Arabic, okay?
Arabic.
So for the headphones.
Of course.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I will answer in Kurdish.
اوكي هناك 3 أفيال وليس فيل واحد في القاعة. فيل فلسطيني يعبر عن نفسه بالرفض دائما منذ 100 عام، منذ رفضت لجنة بيل وقرار التقسيم والدولتين كان هناك رفض فلسطيني دون بدائل. الحالة نفسها مع قرار التقسيم، مع بادرة أبو رقيبة، مع كام ديفيد، مع كل هذه المشاريع. الآن صفقة القرن بها إعطاء 1,000,000 فرصة عمل، بها خفض الفقر 50%، بها 178 مشروع، بها 50 مليار. الرافضون ما هو البدائل؟ لماذا دائما هناك رفض لكل الحلول دون بدائل؟ ما هو البديل لرفض فرصة العمر؟ هذه الفيل الفلسطيني المسكوت عنه. والأهم أن من يرفض يخسر إذا وصل إلى اتفاق، لأنه دائما القيادة الفلسطينية قيادة مزمنة، قيادة تستفيد من المال ومن المناصب طالما أن الإشكال موجود. لو حل الإشكال لا ذهبوا إلى بيوتهم. الفيل العربي المسكوت عنه، الأرض الممتدة من النهر إلى البحر مساحتها 27,000 كيلو فقط.
شكرا جزيلا.
لا اسمح لي ثانية واحدة بس. هذا الفيل الثاني، هذه البواكي على هذه الأرض مبررة، إنما ماذا عن العراق المحتل مساحته 440,000 كيلو، به 5 مليون لاجئ محتل من قبل العراق. ماذا عن سوريا المحتلة من قبل إيران وتركيا؟ تبقى الأخيرة، تبقى رجائي الفيل الأخير نحن في الخليج يطلب منا أن نعادي من يعادونه أي إسرائيل، وفي الوقت نفسه يصادقوا من نعاديه. صادقوا الاتحاد السوفيتي بالأمس، وصادقوا صدام بالأمس، واليوم يصادقوا إيران. أين العدالة في هذه؟ أين سيادة الدول؟ لماذا علينا أن نعادي أعداء بعض الإخوة العرب وهم يصادقوا؟
شكرا جزيلا. شكرا جزيلا. شكرا. زياد عيادات، تفضل.
Thank you.
أو زيد عيادات.
Sorry. Thank you. I will start by picking up on what Shibli has said in terms of prioritizing the peace between Arab and Israel in the American administration. And I can think of two explanations. It's either not a priority, as you said, or it is a priority, but the Americans cannot get through, cannot make it happen. Can't make it happen either because of what's happening in American politics, or they lack the right pressure on Israel to make it happen. And either or, it's a failure of American policy when it comes to Palestinian issues. So that I say, and I think Robert is closer to that. I've been, especially when Obama's things, you've been saying you're somewhere between David and Shibli on the priority issue. And also, I tend to agree with what Shibli says in terms of new changes for what we call the deal of the century. And it is interesting to see this idea of deal of the century and then start blaming politics again about whose phrase is this? Is it Sisi or is it the Americans? Why it matters, and why, if we have a plan or a vision, it matters, as long as we don't know what the details are.
Is that the punchline? Is that the question?
Now, here's my question, and it goes for David, who actually has driven me crazy, and I think is a total twisted logic of what you are saying. And I say why. So, first we have to blame the Palestinians, and then Arafat, and Abbas. And by the way, I'm not a big fan of the Palestinian leadership. Let me finish. I'm not a big fan of Palestinian leadership. But I also not a big fan at all of the Israeli leadership. And you said it, for the last 13 years, Netanyahu was sitting there, and the Palestinian issue should have been solved according to Oslo records back in 1999, so 20 years ago. What did happen? It was Arafat, it was Abbas, or it was the Israelis. And I will come down to game the issue. Okay. So what the Israeli wants, and you've been talking actually as Israelis, not like an American. So what the Israeli wants, do they want two-state solution? What is left of the two-state solutions? I'm finishing, one second, I'm sorry about that, because it is about, the Israelis or the Palestinians. The Palestinians have to go step by step. The politics of flames goes again against the Palestinians. It's the Palestinians' problems, but the issue is occupation and its consequences. This should have ended 20 years ago. It never did because of the Israeli governments. Still today, it is the Israeli who are not for peace. Therefore, a pure Jewish state, no refugees coming back, and Jerusalem is the capital of...
I'm going to...
I'm done.
No, that's
I'm done.
it.
Thank you.
As'ad al-Shamlan. Am I pronouncing it right?
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and I'll have short comments and one question, and I trust that you will be as kind and generous to me as you did for the previous speakers. I have no doubt about that. Now, let me say this. It seems to me that the so-called deal of the century, or what I call the ultimate deal, is neither something to come, nor is it irrelevant, as Mr. Mali was saying. I think it's already accomplished. The deal has been done, which is a free gift from the administration and the rights in the United States to the rights in Israel on the most fundamental issues of Jerusalem, of the settlement issues, and of the refugees. And what makes this even more troubling is that, let's talk about the question of Jerusalem. Now, even if a new president comes with different ideas, it will be very difficult to undo this, because what the administration did is that it enacted an act of Congress. So it didn't really initiate the very idea, and it will be very difficult for any president, for domestic reasons, to undo that, even if they thought it's unwise or antagonistic, etc. But the deal is done, and I think the deal is based on a very crude distinction between interests and values, which is, I think, wrong in any context. I mean, when we talk about interests and values, for example, I value very much Gulf unity, Arab unity, world peace. Now, these are interests as well. It's the interest of the Gulf, it's the interest of the Arab world, it's the interest of the world to have peace. So the distinction between interest and values conceptually is wrong. And in this case, of course, it will not work.
And
the problem, no, I'll just 1 minute. The problem with this issue is that it is part of the domestic scene in the United States. And I think the Arab trust hope with the Palestinians that the US will be a sponsor for a final solution. I think this has come to an end given the ideological landscape in the United States. Now, what we have here today on the ground is really a one-state solution. That's we have to take a good look at what is happening in Israel itself. Western liberals, liberals in the general wide sense of the term, are, and maybe rightly so in some cases, very critical about what happens in the Arab world. But I wish they have the same yardstick when they look into Israeli domestic politics.
Final punchline.
And this is the reality that we have to live with. Now, just one final, the idea that what you were referring to others, that maybe when we look into the future, we should ask what Abbas can do, how compromise. That put us back into the same logic that led us to where we are now. It's not a question of Abbas. The funny thing is that the same people who pushed Abbas to replace Arafat now are critical of him because he's supposed to be stubborn, etc., etc.
That's fine.
My question, final question, short question, and it is to Mr. Mali and maybe Mr. Makovsky, and it is this. At the end of the Obama administration, there was they announced a financial assistance to Israel to the tune of $35 or $37 billion. And even the Israelis, Ehud Barak was surprised. He said, "We don't need money. Our economy is doing very well." Yet they gave them that money. What was that all about? And how this idea of giving this huge sum of money squares with your idea of we need to break the status quo?
We'll take one more. Nabil Fahmy now. And forgive me, I know there's so many experts here and so many have real opinions, but time is an issue. Please make it brief. Start, Nabil.
Very brief. First of all, actions speak louder than words. The problem with the present situation isn't the title of the proposal. It is the actions that have been taken on the ground, be that by the Trump administration or be that by the Israeli administration, which makes it impossible, really, to implement a two-state solution. Many examples were given, but let me add one. If you go back recently to what Greenblatt just said about 242, he basically considered it to be an irrelevant resolution that was something of the past. That's the basis of all Arab-Israeli peace agreements. If that's not the basis for moving forward, then frankly there's no basis even to look at initiatives like the Arab peace initiatives or otherwise. I would add two more points. One is that East Jerusalem is not a real estate project. The idea that you can expand it and give territory that was in another suburb and claim that's part of East Jerusalem, it's not going to work. The real issue is the religious area of East Jerusalem, the old city, and how that relates to the capital of Palestine. My last point is, David, this is not about a marathon or 5Ks. It's about moving the finish line. Unless there's a commitment to a two-state solution that has an Israeli narrative and a Palestinian narrative, we're never going to get there. So I would recommend that if the Israelis, if Gantz or whoever, is ready to commit to the Arab Peace Initiative and then ask to discuss the details of what steps we can get there, that's the logical solution. But to ask Arabs to propose incremental steps when they don't know whether Israel is committed to the peace initiative, that frankly doesn't make any sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Instead of having answer questions and sort of final round, this is the final round and answering questions. David, we'll start with you.
All right, look, first of all, I completely agree with a person I hold in deep respect, Amr Moussa, about this issue being transformed into a religious conflict. It's a catastrophe. It's a catastrophe. There's no shortage of words because it takes an issue of Israelis and Palestinians. If you turn into Jews and Muslims, it becomes an issue of absolutes, which religion tends to do. This needs to be avoided at all costs. I agree with you 1,000%. The second point also on the Arab Peace Initiative, which I think could be a good template to be discussed, but it gets to Nabil's point. Look, my appeal to you, a very direct appeal to you, helped create political space there is because there's a division, like there is in every democracy over there. In the United States, we have divisions there too. In my country, the U.S., I don't even get into the divisions there, the polarization. My point is, on this one issue of the conflict, you can have an impact on the division within by helping create space. Because if we had enough, watching this conflict there and saying if there was enough support there for the 67 lines, that you wouldn't even need the space. I mean, it's a chicken and egg issue. You have to create the space so you get the public support. And I think it should be parallel steps. And I certainly, and I felt that one of these gentlemen were a little twisting what I said, because I said it more than once that I don't think Netanyahu can do a final status deal. And I've also critical of the Trump approach, which I believe on that. If you were going to go down this road, you needed to lay the groundwork with the Arab governments, with the Europeans. You don't cut aid to hospitals in East Jerusalem. I mean, I think this could have been done very differently, and therefore I certainly don't associate myself, whether you call it a vision or a plan, I don't associate myself with it. But I'm just saying that I think you're not being fair if you don't realize there's differences in Israel between Gantz and Netanyahu. And political space for one side could have an impact. Okay. And I'm not saying do it for free. No. A step towards the Palestinians is a step towards Israel. I think this is a real moment in time. I think it's a historic moment. I don't know how long it'll be open, but I don't want to look back in 5 years and say, oh yeah, there was that chance in 2019 of a different government in Israel, and we didn't seize the moment in the Arab world. I think you could have a big impact. That's all.
Thank you. That's excellent. Thank you.
Let me make 3 quick points. One is about the American role. Of course, we're talking about the deal of the century, and therefore it is an American proposal. So we're focused on the U.S. It doesn't mean that parties in the region, including Israelis and Palestinians, haven't failed. So it's not really so much blaming as explaining what the U.S. Has been doing. But the U.S. does have a particular responsibility on this issue, unlike many other issues, because it is its role on this issue is one reason we have this asymmetry that you're starting with. Without it, we wouldn't have the same kind of asymmetry that is now limiting the possibilities and diminishing the leverage the Palestinians have. So the U.S. does have a responsibility. I don't think this is as important a moment as David seems to suggest about a new opportunity. I don't see it that way. Nonetheless, I'm not cynical. And I say I'm not cynical because while I don't see a moment of transformation upon us, I think even little differences matter. So I don't think a Gantz government will be the same as Netanyahu. He'll probably make some important things that might be helpful on the ground, including, by the way, Palestinian citizens of Israel who are now acquiring a little more influence. I think that's a good thing, regardless of the big picture. These are things that you have to look at and just don't dismiss. And certainly economic benefits to the Palestinians, it's desperately needed. Those are things that are important regardless of the politics. But let's not kid ourselves. The bottom line question in the Israeli-Palestinian question is a political question. It's not about money. It's not about development. This is a struggle for both that have gone on for too long. And there is nothing that you can put on the table, no matter how much money you put on the table. And by the way, when you break the money that has been offered, the Palestinians get much less than you might actually think. But nonetheless, even if they got more, it isn't going to transform the reality. It isn't going to make them less attached to Jerusalem. It isn't going to make them less wanting sovereignty and independence. And so, therefore, I think, we get lost in the trees by making these little arguments. Oh, why don't you accept this? Why don't you play along? Why don't you go along with it? That is really not something that we got to get lost in those trees. We got to keep the big picture as we move forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Masri.
I believe that Mr. Gantz is different than Netanyahu, and we might see some different actions. I explained my point of view based on what I see on the ground. I am not theorizing. I'm not inventing stories. This is what happened during the last 2 decades of negotiations after Oslo and so on. So it is Israel who has been blocking a lot of initiatives because they are not admitting that this is an occupied territory. They say, when they talk, this is mine and what's yours is negotiable. What is mine, and what is yours is negotiable. If, as long as this is still valid, it will not work because it's a big, major difference, not due to the Palestinian rejection, but due to the Israeli plans that have been building for the last 70 years. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Robert.
So very quickly, on 2 points. First on this, will there be a Gantz moment or not? I want to come back to something Nabil said, because I think it's really critical. Yes, Gantz will be different from Netanyahu, particularly domestically in Israel, but also some steps on the ground that he could take. But let's not forget, we tried step by step before. We tried incrementalism. The whole reason we went to this trying to do a Big Bang was because it failed. Now, the Big Bang didn't work either, but to simply forget that we were there in the 90s and that we walked away from it, because if neither side knows where they're going to lead, neither side wants to take steps to get there because they're afraid of the other side. They don't know where the other side is going to go. So probably Gantz could even take some unilateral steps because he's not going to get a deal with the Palestinians for these small ones, and that will improve their lives. But as Shibli said, let's not kid ourselves about what that means about resolving the conflict. Secondly, very quickly, somebody raised a point about U.S. assistance to Israel, $3.8 billion a year over 10 years, that's $38 billion. That's part of commitments that the U.S. has made to Israel for a long time. I think what's interesting, and that has bipartisan support. What is new, how relevant and how significant it is, I think is too early to say, but you have 3 of the major Democratic candidates that for the first time have said we should put perhaps some conditionality on that aid to make sure that it doesn't go to practices that are inconsistent with U.S. values. They've not been very specific about what that means, but it's the first time maybe others would know better, but the first time that I could recall that major U.S. candidates have at least put that on the public, in the public debate.
Thank you so much. I'm sure everybody agrees. This was highly engaging, a very hot topic. There's so much more to it that we could have carried on. I want to apologize to those whom I could not pick because of the time, but I want to thank everyone on the panel, and I'd like to thank you in the usual way.